So today, CSS variables. The success of any workaround is to ultimately eliminate itself. The success of jQuery is that it's no longer really recommended or in use, because all those array methods and selectors have all been adopted natively into ES6 and it no longer really is a strong requirement. But it shows that it provided a use case that people needed, people adopted, and then it was a strong case for moving it in. When it comes to CSS, you'd have to look at pre-processes, the Sass and less, these things that are going to give functional value to CSS that people were clearly crying out for. That's variables, that's nesting, that's mix-ins, that's all these functional values which ultimately perhaps will make their way into CSS natively because they're popular, because people find value in them. Well, variables are here, and what's more, they offer more benefit than the ones used traditionally in a preprocessor. They continue to be variables in your browser. Traditionally, a preprocessor, you would have to use that just for your own programming, but then when you actually compile it, it will just convert it to the actual value. Now with the variable, it will continue to take that value once it's in the page. The benefit of that is that we can continue to edit and change those, plus the scoping benefits, which make it easier to build customizable modular CSS. I'll show you what I mean. So, the syntax is a little bit strange at first to wrap your head around. Often the examples involve declaring variables at the root. So we'll follow that example. If I use a dash syntax and give it a name, myvar red, so then you're just setting that's the property name, myvar, and that's the value of red. Later on, I can then use that by saying color var, and then in brackets, you then reference the variable you want to use. So here, I'm going to get some red text. That really is variables in a nutshell. That's the basic syntax of how you define them and use them. But of course they offer a great deal of value beyond that. For a start, as I said, they're scoped. So if I then, within a paragraph, say I want to redefine that variable, my var is going to be blue. Then inside that div, you'll now see that the text takes on a different value, even though they're both using the exact same setting. The only CSS setting is that color setting, but it's just that the variable is changing. So here you're writing less CSS, you're just changing properties, which you're getting to custom name and define to change how the actual output works. This fundamentally changes your paradigm. Rather than making CSS that you have to read through to make sense of what's happening, you can declaratively set a bunch of settings, which is why the term custom properties is also used interchangeably with CSS variables. And you're able to much more cleanly scope and select and style how you want your layout to work. As I mentioned, the variables continue to be live. So if you're looking at DevTools, you won't just see that that text is now set to blue. You'll see it set to the myvar variable, which continues to be editable. I can now click this open and change it, and you can do this programmatically with JavaScript. You can set and change values, you can respond to user events, so it means your CSS remains live and editable on a page. And there are potentially a whole bunch of really useful ways of implementing this. I don't think there are currently though. The main ones people refer to are dark mode, and the ability to toggle dark mode, or anything where you're able to theme or change a page with user inputs. It's a lot easier to do with these variables, but I can't think of many actual valuable use cases for that. Someone will tell me there are loads, but for a slightly more complicated example, it's something that's largely borrowed from a front-end master's course. I'll link in the description. It's a multi-column layout, so kind of you traditionally use your Bootstrap 12 column or something, except it's all being done with a series of custom properties. So the only actual CSS here is a single flex basis property, which is applied to a section element. And that derives its values using a calc that's going to combine a series of CSS variables. So it's going to have a basis number, of which the default is the number of columns, removing the gap, which is going to work out the padding in between. But the point is, one single flex property is going to define how every section should be laid out. And then here with IDs, I've been able to just, on each section, just change its CSS variable to tell it how many column widths it should make up. and all the calcs and all the maths will work out all the other values for it, and you've made this beautifully dynamic, adaptable layout. And suddenly it's a really easy thing to just plug in and add things and adapt things as you need, because of you've done all the hard work in your settings. They're perfectly readable and semantic. Later on in media queries, I can just change the number of columns in my layout, and then I can change what widths I want different sections to be, all just playing with changing variable properties rather than writing loads of boilerplate CSS each time. So really, that's CSS variables. The key things to know are it's a massive step forward from how they were implemented in preprocessors. You have the live element, you have this scoped value within selectors, and you have great capacity now to build your CSS in a much more structured, semantic way. I hope people begin to implement this a lot more in future projects. That's all, guys. Do the usual, like and comment, subscribe, all that.